Ja, guten Morgen und herzlich willkommen zu diesem zweiten Tag des Digital Lab, des dritten Digital Lab der Kulturstiftung des Bundes, des Fonds Digital. Ich hoffe, Sie hatten einen spannenden Tag gestern. Ich hatte den auf jeden Fall. Der Titel dieser Veranstaltung ist ja Prototyping Futures, Digitalität als Kulturpraxis, und so ganz praktisch haben Sie damit schon gearbeitet gestern in den Workshops. Die werden auch heute weiterlaufen, Anschluss an dieses Panel, die Lightning Talks. Gestern war der Fokus eher auf dem Digital Mindset. Und da wurde auch gefragt, wie in das Digital Mindset eventuell auch Hierarchien hineinspielen können oder auch so diskriminierende Mechanismen. Das wird uns auch heute beschäftigen, aber wir beschäftigen uns heute eher mit einem Blick auf das Thema Digital Complicity oder digitale Komplizinnenschaft, wie wir das übersetzt haben. Darum wird es gehen in den Lightning Talks und auch in dem Panel, was dann nach den Workshops und einer Evaluation stattfinden wird, heute Nachmittag. Genau, und wir würden jetzt gleich mit den Lightning Talks hier einsteigen, und ich würde aber ganz gerne vorher noch einmal kurz Julia May aufs Podium bitten. Julia May kennen Sie wahrscheinlich alle. Julia May ist bei der Kulturstiftung des Bundes wissenschaftliche Mitarbeiterin und betreut den Bereich Kultur digital. Ja, Julia.
Ja, guten Morgen auch von mir. Und auch herzlich willkommen im Namen der Kulturstiftung des Bundes und im Namen meines Teams Kultur Digital beim zweiten Tag dieses Digital Lab. Sie kennen mich, ich darf die Fonds Digital-Projekte in diesen 4 Jahren inhaltlich betreuen, und zu dieser inhaltlichen Betreuung gehört dieses Lab natürlich. Es gehören unsere Projektleitungstreffen, die ein Teil von Ihnen natürlich kennen. Es gehört unsere Fortbildungsreihe dazu, die wir gemeinsam mit der Pausanias-Akademie entwickelt haben und durchführen. Und es gehört auch dazu die Evaluation des Programms Kultur Digital, die wir mit dem Team von Evalux durchführen und die wir Ihnen auch heute Nachmittag vorstellen werden. Um 14 Uhr werde ich gemeinsam mit Evalux nochmal auf der Bühne sein und wir werden über die Evaluation sprechen. Ein Kern meiner Arbeit ist immer diese Frage, wie man am besten diese Erfahrungen aus Kultur Digital, die Erfahrungen, die Sie machen, Ihr Wissen, das, was entsteht, sichtbar macht, weitergibt. Und ich bin unserer Kuratorin Susanne Schuster sehr, sehr dankbar für das Format gestern der Table Talks, weil ich fand, das war ein großartiges Format, um sehr nah in Projekte reinzuschauen, um sich Prototypen anzuschauen, um nochmal ins Denken zu kommen, ins Gespräch zu kommen. Das war für mich sehr inspirierend. Das Digital Mindset, es war gestern das Thema. Ich bin auch nochmal sehr dankbar, dass Sie das auch kritisch hinterfragt haben gestern und auch gerade im Gespräch auch kritische Themen anklangen, und freue mich heute sehr auf den Talk jetzt von NAKEEMA STEFFLBAUER und dann im Anschluss von KEIKEN, um unser Thema Digital Complicity zu beleuchten, und ich hoffe genauso kritisch sich damit auseinanderzusetzen. Ich würde noch mal gerne einen Aspekt, den auch Frau Völkers gestern angesprochen hatte, noch mal stark machen. Also wir haben unser Lab Prototyping Futures genannt, und die Hoffnung ist, dass Sie eben auch, also in diesen Workshops vor allem, einfach diese Gelegenheit nutzen, dass Sie ganz einen kurzen Moment haben, in dem Sie nicht in Ihren Alltagsfragen drin sind und noch mal tatsächlich jetzt sehen, eben Prototyping Futures, wie machen Sie, was ist nach dem Ende der Projektlaufzeit, also wie können Sie Arbeitsweisen erhalten, wie können Sie Dinge verstetigen. Heute Morgen hatte ich ein Gespräch, ich sehe Sie jetzt gar nicht, mit Projektträgern, wo ich denke, diese Frage, die stellt sich jeden Tag irgendwie, das muss sich hier gar nicht mehr adressieren, das ist irgendwie so schon klar, es ist schon so weit fortgeschritten und dass das gar nicht passt, aber dennoch hoffe ich, dass Sie dazu jetzt gut ins Arbeiten kommen, und damit würde ich wieder zurückgeben an KATJA und freue mich jetzt auf die Lightning Talks.
Ja, danke schön. Vielleicht noch ein kleiner Hinweis, die Feedback-Gegend gibt es immer noch vorne im Eingangsbereich. Da ist zwar nicht mehr der Matthias Leitner, aber Sie sind immer noch gefragt, da Ihr Feedback zu dem Lab zu hinterlassen. Genau, das war noch ein wichtiger Hinweis und dann würde ich sagen, steigen wir jetzt sofort ein, weil die Zeit rennt. Und ich würde an dieser Stelle jetzt ins Englische switchen, weil die Lightning Talks werden auf Englisch sein. So I switch back to English. So the focus of the coming Lightning Talks will be on the vision for digital complicity within cultural institutions, and we will be hearing, as said, thoughts on the matter by NAKEEMA STEFFLBAUER. I just say a few words to whom she is. NAKEEMA is an expert for software provision and was responsible for the digital transformation of several companies in the US and in Europe. Algorithmic justice, inclusion and fairness is her main topic and very fundamental to her approach of work. She also is the CEO of Frauenloop. This is a Berlin-based non-profit organization which transmits programming skills to women. And her lightning talk for today has the title Attack Power Play, ? Digitalization in the arts. And it will raise the question of how power dynamics and exclusive mechanisms will play a role within digital setups. So, NAKEEMA, thank you very much for joining us here on the stage, and the stage is yours now.
Good morning. I wanted to introduce myself, but that was just done. I'm NAKEEMA STEFFLBAUER, and I wanted to start off my talk by focusing on one key question and to follow that up with multiple other questions. So I'm coming to this talk from the tech development space, especially in industry where tech has grown to prominence through the process of applying three key factors to business applications. Those include speed, those include precision, and those include repetition. That's what's valued when technology is applied in industry. Arts is the polar opposite. If we pair technology with the arts, ideally, we're doing that in order to amplify human expression, and we're doing that in order to expand on the human experiences. We should also help living artists to make a living, so that leads me to the key question, which is what happens when art and technology collide? The second question is, who benefits when we focus on the distribution of finished, ready for dissemination artistic product? By that I mean musicians, writers who have already been able to create a new channel and new licensing revenue opportunities, but for other performers, for other artists, that's been less the case, with the exception of some film actors who cut deals with Netflix. The digital distribution of finished work tends to put power and agency in the hands of whomever controls those digital channels. And the artistic producers themselves, if they are able to secure revenue, licensing, and an extension of their intellectual property rights. So that raises the question of why we're not paying all creators and all artists for the rights to digitally disseminate their work. That would be an additive opportunity, and that would mean digitalization in a tangible way that is positive for all artists. Speaking of digitalization in a positive way, one way to separate the digital distribution of finished work is to think about finished work and distribution versus the creation of new product using technology in an integrative sense. There are obviously risks that I've listed here. There's the risk of welcoming any type of creative production that integrates technology, which means that you may quickly find that artists who don't use technology to create their art are excluded, or that there's an artificially high standard that becomes the norm that's very difficult for artists and creators to engage in without using whatever the latest technological tools are. But maybe the best way to think about this is to harken back to the situation in the music industry in the 1980s, where you had the sampling phenomenon. That was a new type of technology that very few in the industry or elsewhere knew how to handle. You had hip-hop artists in particular who were copying snippets of pre-existing musical work, and no one really understood where the borders lie for who owned what, who was copying, who was creating novel works of art based on a beat, a lyric, or a sample. Then as now, there was a huge risk, and that risk was that you end up, through the lack of clarity in terms of what creates, involves creative work, of ripping off the artists who've already created something that was copyrighted in the first place. And that was a time when, except for the artists who had access to aggressive legal representation, you had a lot of artists whose work was simply stolen and not credited. Here's a conversation that took place very recently on social media. And I want to ask you to take 30 seconds to read through this exchange, going clockwise from the left. What I would say it's important to take away from this exchange, whether or not you can imagine having your own creative work copied, distributed, and published without your consent, is that the technology to do just that is already here, is already public, is already being used for many artists with exactly this effect, which is theft. It's happening extremely quickly, and just like in the industry of the music industry, it's happening without much legal amendment or adaptation, which makes paying artists, at least in the music industry instance, for work that they copied, sampled, amplified in some way, mandatory. So that's not happening yet in the arts, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing exchanges like this that are going into the ether of social media without any result that is tangible and can be legally acted upon. These are some of the platforms that I've selected to demonstrate how technology is being used to accelerate this kind of derivative or copycat artistic production. All of their stock in trade is synthetic, whether it's synthetic images or synthetic videos or synthetic voice production. Some people call this type of technology an evolution, a natural evolution, and others call it theft. It's the standardization, and some people allege the evisceration of human expression and what's unique about human expression. And this technology is especially worrying to those of us who value individuality and imperfection, because this is what these types of technologies are typically used to edit out. How they work, whether it's Stability AI, deepfakes.com, or Sonantic, which is a company that creates synthetic voice that was recently acquired by Spotify, it's generally the same. They draw on repositories that are built of thousands or millions of images, in the case of Stability AI, scraped from the web, and they allow any general user who has web access to generate new images that are kind of remixes or derivatives based on keyword prompts that are connected to categorization labels that are associated with each one of those millions of images in these repositories. What that means is that you can use this technology to synthesize images that you can select or you can tag as resembling the work of another artist or resembling the representation of any given subject. It also means that certain styles and certain individuals' unique styles can equally be keyword searched and then generated as a derivative of Megan Rose Ruiz, as was shown in the example previously. The thing about deepfake videos and synthetic voice technology is that it works similarly in that they use machine learning to pattern match. And in this case, it's not just the edge recognition and the images, static images that you want to reproduce the pattern of in order to create similar imagery. It's extending the video expressions, movements, or extending the pattern of someone's voice such that you can improvise, essentially, using a kind of color palette made up of human expressions on video or vocal cadences and pitches on audio files. Probably the best known example of the Sonantic technology, which is synthetic vocals, is Val Kilmer's performance in the most recent Top Gun movie. Val Kilmer has lost the ability to speak in performance or other contexts, and the Sonantic software was able to synthesize enough snippets of his previous vocal performances to be able to essentially improvise a whole performance that he did not give for this movie, thereby allowing him to speak. Some artistic uses, like that one with Val Kilmer, are pointed out as the generative and the positive impact of synthetic technologies and how creative they are. But most of us know about these synthetic technologies based on the fact that they're usually unlicensed, they're usually unauthorized, and in many, many cases, they are deliberately defamatory. If they're unauthorized, these synthetic derivatives end up replacing human content and human performances. If that doesn't seem scary, then I would ask you to consider another aspect of the collision between art and technology. That's the erasure of ethnic and racial markers. The example specifically that I give in this, these images was an example that I sourced when looking for, in the first place, an image of dance artists who perform voguing. Now, historically, many people know from Pose and other films like Paris is Burning, that voguing is a dance art created by queer, Black, and Latino performers in New York from the 80s. But in this case, when I did a search, all I was able to find through the Creative Commons images that are freely available online was white, cis-presenting artists who were performing in images that were labeled as voguing. This is exactly the kind of keyword searches to generate new or creative work that do not reflect the lived reality. They're just a representation, a curation of the images that are already there. That is exactly what can happen and what does happen when we move to technology and rely on technology rather than individual artistic creation based on individual perspectives and experiences. All of the photos that I looked for this particular presentation were photos of ethnic artists, photos of representative creators. And yet, what I found in many cases was either a limited selection of imagery or a representation that does not match the representations that I'm familiar with for vocal artists, for artists at work in studios, these types of experiences that are familiar to me and that reflect exactly what the world that I grew up in multicultural New York City, was always about. This is a good example of what I worry about happening as we add more technological solutions to the artistic process. What I worry about with regard to synthetic voices is that when standard voice intonations becomes the expectation, then all of the ethnic and racial and linguistic intonations, differences become smoothed out and optimized to a Siri-like norm that essentially erases the experiences of anyone and everyone who doesn't sound like Siri. And it leaves us with a paucity of experiences and of historical influence on the world we live in. Same thing can also happen to things like street arts, where graffiti, breakdancing. In this instance, I was able to find an ethnic minority creator, but what happens when we find that all of the images that are being searched, that are being labeled, that are being put to use in a digitalized repository do not include many or any ethnic creators? Does it mean that slowly we see the complete erasure of certain people, certain groups, certain presentations of humanity in the arts that then affects the type of creation, the type of remixing, the type of improvisational visualization that can be done? I would say that by now tech has infused so many different areas of life that it is getting harder and harder to determine which areas should be and which areas are actually independent in the creative process from technology. Which areas should have human inputs, and which areas should have creativity protected from technological optimization. To repeat my warning from earlier, adding technology to the creative process uncritically, as people will, can create a standard that's unattainable, without that technology. It can create a situation where you remove agency and uniqueness from creative artists and creators, and you put power in the hands of those who are able to best utilize technological tools, whether they are creative or not, because they have the access and they have the ability to both remix existing media and to distribute it through digital means. I didn't touch on augmented reality or virtual reality in this talk because these kinds of technology tend to be less distribution and broad distribution focused and more limited in terms of the access that they provide to creative work due to the cost and the reality of requiring headsets and expensive technology in order to immerse oneself in virtual reality and many augmented reality experiences. But all of the images that I used, other than the photographs in this talk, are synthetic images that I curated using either DALL-E or Stability AI's repository of image generation product. So I want you to take a moment to consider whether it matters to you that an algorithm curated the images, apart from the photographs that I used, instead of a human creating those images. These are independently generated images that are keyword curated to look like or to represent something that I've specified. What does that say about the future of art if everyone is looking for an approximation of what they're trying to visualize and making use of whatever they're fed by an algorithm? I want to leave you with a couple of suggestions. One of which is that I think making technology the subject of artistic inquiry isn't nearly as complicated or challenging as it might seem. We in the tech sector who work every day with technologies and their development and testing understand, and we know very well about the dangers of exclusion, problems in data repositories. We know about cultural underrepresentation or erasure in data sets. We know about the racial and the sex stereotypes that appear again and again. And we also know about the misuse and the unauthorized use that nobody is really responsible for in most cases when personally identifiable data appears online. But what would artistic creation look like if all of us, and not just the technologists and the specialists and the folks who were paid to understand the implications of technology, but if everyone was empowered to critically examine the impact of technology on humans? In other words, if tech is this incredibly powerful tool and it's connecting people with art, then shouldn't art also connect people and the technologies that are already influencing so many areas of our life? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, NAKEEMA. That was very interesting and a lot of points, I think, which would be interesting to discuss as well. And I brought a lot of questions, but first of all, I would maybe open the discussion as well to the public. There is a microphone in the hall, and if you have any questions to NAKEEMA, I invite you to raise your hand, and then the microphone will be brought to you, and you can ask your question. But maybe I start with my question, because what you gave us now is a very critical, of course, vision of how something like digital complicity can be read. It sounds nice, it sounds inviting and inclusive and remixing, but it is very biased, as you pointed out. How would you describe something, or the concept of digital complicity, in a more integrative way? How could it look like? Maybe as well in your work, when you work with companies and you try to make the discourse more sensitive to the question. How do you intervene in these institutions?
I think the easiest way to create a positive approach to digital complicity starts with transparency, and it starts with acknowledging in a very open way where and how the tools that you're using, the vision, the lens that you're approaching whatever the product is through, have been affected by technology, and what some of the limitations of those technologies might be. Very often what happens, and what I critiqued in this talk, is that technology is kind of integrated and incorporated as magic. And it's a magic that kind of accrues to whoever's using it. So by extension, if you are able to search the right images and copy, the right keywords, then you can create work that actually you had a very different process, and you may or may not be even crediting the real originators from whom your remixed or improvised artwork is derived. So I think that transparency and acknowledgement of what's really happening is important. And that's also true in industry, where we have a huge problem with AI technologies being credited with all manner of positive, negative, every kind of outcomes. And when it's time to say there's an adverse outcome, nobody's responsible. It's the machines, it's the software, the programmers just put in the code they were told to put in. So transparency is the starting point, but an acknowledgement that there are limitations to most technologies that we're working with, however new, however expansive, is a good starting point.
You said already it's quite opaque. Oftentimes it's not very transparent how technology works. What would be a more empowered way to deal with this? Because, a lot of people just don't know.
There are increasing numbers of exhibits, artistic inquiries, and workshops that I've been part of, that I've seen, that I know are happening all over the world, that are looking specifically at the influence of the available technology on the artist's process and the ways that the creator is trying to express whatever the subject is of their inquiry. I think that's what I was aiming at in this talk, and that's what I hope to see more of, because that's a really good antidote to audiences and non-participants in the creative process, understanding that tech is not just something that's happening in business, it's not something that's happening on your phones or on your devices. And I think that's really important to underscore, that we are existing in a time where technology is the cameras that are always on, the software that someone is always running, the trackers, all of these things that are changing the ways that we engage with each other and the ways that we perceive our own human experience. I'm just looking if
there's a question.
I have two questions. The first, do you have any best practice advices or institutions that are dealing with these kind of issues and they are doing it well or good?
In terms of institutional uses of technology or institutional positions on the use of technology?
The first one.
Uses of technology, I'm seeing a lot of good institutional practice just in terms of those museums, those galleries, those exhibits that are focused on digitalization of finished work, right? So they're working with artists who have disclosure statements about what tools and technologies they use, and then they limit their support for these exhibits, for these creative works, to distribution and digital dissemination. And in some cases, they are discussing licensing and sort of diffusion rights using digital channels so that you have a clear intellectual property right to show your work on YouTube or not have your work shown on YouTube, for example.
And the second one is, do you think that there's the possibility that you have like a social or a diversity standard for artists working with technology in their artwork, so that you say, okay, if you use that kind of data set, then we have to say that you work with that data set as well during the exhibition or something like that?
It's a good idea, but it doesn't really address the main issue, which is what all of the currently available machine learning-driven image generation platforms do. They basically have a disclaimer that says, you know, these images may contain, you know, representations that reflect stereotypes and problems socially that are currently in the world, and use them at your own risk. Asking artists to do the same thing just really passes the buck and allows them to say, you know, I'm also not responsible for the misrepresentation or the ways that my imagery is limited by the repository of images that I started with. But I think it's a good first step to say, at least tell us if, you know, you painted this painting or if this painting was simply generated by a platform where you typed in Matisse and whatever the subject. Because as you have probably heard, the Colorado State Arts Festival first place winner was someone who had done exactly that and performed keyword searches to generate an image that then won a prize over artists who actually created their artwork using their labor and no technological tools. So yeah, I think that's a good first step, is to ask artists who do use digitally sourced or generated images to disclose which platforms, and also to disclose what disclaimers exist on those sites.
Are there any other questions? So we have one there, and I think...
Hello. Yeah, I had one question. The word improvisation came up a few times in a few different contexts, and I wonder, is there any particular idea that comes along with it? I know it's a little, improvisation in a digital context is a little hard because usually improvisation is something that evades documentation on purpose, or somehow is escaping that. And but without pursuing that theoretically too far, I wonder if there's some idea that the word improvisation brought along to you in this context, or some artistic showing that you had seen that brought that out.
So improvisation is the positive and the nice way of describing what the machine learning algorithms that are responsible for text-to-image generation platforms does. It's exactly the same mechanism that deepfake video or synthetic audio generation algorithms do. What technologists call it is pattern matching, but it's pattern matching, if you will, that goes outside the lines of a specific frame, which is either the samples of someone's speech or clips of someone speaking, behaving normally in video. So basically what these algorithms are trained based on the volume of source material that they start with is they're trained to continue the patterns that they've identified within the frame or the specified sample so that they can work outside the lines. And because this is very often more or less a black box exercise, it is kind of like improvisation in that the algorithm is just working with whatever patterns it's been able to mathematically identify, and they're not necessarily rules or guidelines as to how these improvisations are going to look.
Thank you very much. I think as the time is running quite a bit and we still have another lightning talk, this is it. Thank you very much, NAKEEMA, for this very valuable input. And we will continue with the next lightning talk. And the next lightning talk will come from Kaiken Collective. Maybe you met Tanya yesterday at the table talks. She had the occasion to present some of her work. And I think it will be interesting to see how Kaiken Collective is dealing maybe with some of the issues NAKEEMA as well mentioned. I just say a few words about what Kaiken is. It's a London and Berlin-based artist collective founded in 2015. Hannah Omori, Isabel Ramos, and Tanya Cruz are part of the crew, or are the crew of Kaiken Collective. The name Kaiken comes from a Japanese word I learned, which is the word for experience, and I think the word experience is quite programmatic to the work of Kaiken. They work a lot with speculative worlds created with film, gaming, software, virtual reality, and performance all melted into one thing. And the personal experience plays here a very important role. And I think that it makes total sense that Tanya Cruz, who's representing Kaiken today, will raise the question in her talk, how the metaverse pierces our perceptions of reality. And so, Tanya, the stage is yours.
Hi, so I'm Tanya. Thank you for the introduction. So I was also going to introduce myself, but I guess you've done most of that, but I will provide a little bit more context as well. So I suppose some of you might have met me yesterday, so you're already a little bit familiar. But yeah, I'm 1/3 of KEIKEN, and it's myself and my colleagues Hannah Omori and Isabel Ramos. We each come from different cultural backgrounds, including Mexican, Japanese, and Jewish, and we think that these different backgrounds that we come from allow us to bridge many different complex ideas of philosophy and technology and the future, and hopefully bridge them into these accessible and immersive artworks that are for all different audiences and different generations as well. So we have this kind of line that together we are collaboratively building and imagining a metaverse to simulate new structures and ways of existing and to test drive possible futures. So for those who maybe aren't familiar, I'm sure many of you are, it's kind of a controversial topic anyway. But the metaverse is a fully immersive virtual space of multiple worlds. But I think the way that we see it is that it allows us to become the architects and collaborators of the future. So, and like was said before, we see the metaverse as something that has the potential to pierce our perceptions of reality and to defy all that we know. So I think we see it as a space in which we can create room for transformation and flip our understanding of reality on its head and hopefully see something new or different or better, maybe. So yeah, we create a lot of speculative fictions and world building. through filmmaking, gaming, installation, AR and VR and performance, and it's through these varied mediums that we explore how societal introjection governs the way that we feel, think, and perceive. I think this video was supposed to be playing while I was talking, but it didn't. So let me go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about our methodology, and it kind of, it's about our approach to art making, and it kind of brings back to what KEIKEN means and when we first started collaborating together about 7 years ago. So KEIKEN is the direct Japanese translation for the word experience. So Hana Omori, who I work with, is Japanese, so this is where the connection to that word comes from. But it all kind of started when we were still working together at university, and we all had very different artistic approaches, from drawing to performance to video. And for some reason, we were very good friends, but we decided that we wanted to work together, but we really had no idea what it meant to collaborate and how to even approach that. So our first move was to dissect each other's individual practices to see if we could find connections. And the main thing that we came upon was this core idea of experience, which sounds very vague and general, but we kind of chose it to become our collective title because it's something that is really fundamental to how each of us was approaching things. So whether that was exploring the nature of consciousness or actually just pushing the boundaries of what an immersive experience can be. So I think at its essence, this is really what underpins our approach and our methodology to art making. And creating these art experiences that at the center is this deep consideration for how the audience interact with the work itself. I think it's kind of, everyone knows that we all learn through experience anyway, and for us, I suppose we want to create experiences for the audience that allow them to be a participant and to have an active role in its experience, so that they can, hopefully learn something through that experience themselves. I think we're not so interested in these kind of passive experiences. Maybe that's just who we are as people anyway. Maybe we have short attention spans and need to be engaged all the time. But that's what we hope to do with our artworks anyway. And naturally, we fell into this kind of approach of world building and creating speculative fictional worlds and narratives about possible futures and their impacts on humanity and nature. So with this, we realized, and it's fairly obvious, I guess, that tech is a huge part of that, and tech will be a huge part of the future. At the time, or when we were at university, we weren't taught any technical skills. We didn't really know what it was to make works technically, but over the course of this time that we've been collaborating, we've been teaching ourselves how to work in gaming engines, how to work with animation and motion capture and all sorts of different mediums, and yeah, teaching each other. But this is definitely very challenging, but I think our approach or methodology it's quite lucky that we actually were defining ourselves quite early on, because I think it's something that what we defined ourselves as is something that's simple and complex at the same time, and it's something that still very much aligns with our approach. So while I'm talking, you'll probably be seeing some images of our installations and artworks in the background, but I won't be going into too much detail on them. I'll be more talking about our approach and the concepts behind our work. So I now wanted to address, again, a little bit more about the impact that we hope the audience has when they experience our works in these immersive environments that we create. We're particularly influenced by Adrienne Marie Brown and her kind of concept or strategy of emergent strategy. So this is the idea that micro actions can have macro outcomes. And I think that, I guess this kind of relates to the fact that, you know, when you're teaching someone, they might, or you have an experience or an encounter, you might not always recognize in that moment what impact it has until much later on. So there's this kind of fractal responsibility. And this is the kind of approach that we like to take, because we're not so interested in kind of forcing things or ideas down people's throats. We want people to come in open and be receptive to what they can connect to with the work. So since the primary exploration of our narrative happens through world building and imagining new futures, these futures that we are imagining have always kind of springboarded from the current reality. So they have this approach, or we have this approach, that is reflecting on the contemporary moment as though now is history. So whatever speculative future it is that we have created, it's always actually very much grounded in something political or philosophical that we're experiencing today, and it's just subverting that into perhaps something that's much more exaggerated to, I guess, just propose different outcomes and make people think about what it is that it could be. So for us, it's important if the audience can have a kind of very tactile or tangible experience of some of these ideas that we're trying to convey or communicate. And if there's a chance that this encourages them to question the nature of our reality or to shift their thinking, I guess to challenge or probe them somehow, even if it's only for the duration of the experience, then we feel that the work has somehow been successful. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, just in the image you can see behind me, there's 2 installation shots from an installation that we have called Player of Cosmic Realms, and it features 2 different interactive or experiential works. So the first is what I was talking about in the table talk yesterday, which is the prototype technology we produced, which is a haptic wearable womb. And the other is an interactive episodic film series. So it consists of 3 different film episodes that one is interactive, it's like playable like a game, and the other 2 have game-like functions that you can play at the same time. And I think something that I've been thinking about lately in our approach to this work is that it could be considered 2-sided, I guess, like a haiku. It's not actually complete without the inference of the participant's own experience. So, and I think this is the approach that we like to take, because it's very much about the community and it's very much about a work not existing on its own. It's cohesive in its environment and the people who are engaging with it. So now I wanted to also talk a little bit about another methodology that we use, which is world building. And I think this is really central to our approach. It's central to our approach in terms of the creative side, in terms of narrative. I mean, all our artworks are narrative-based, and they may be different, but they actually all connect to one another with it somehow. They exist within the same world, the same kind of conceptual world. But we also use world building in our approach to collaboration with one another, because when you create a world, it's really important to create space for collaboration, but also for autonomy. And we think that this is absolutely necessary for any kind of collaboration or community building, and especially within the technological or digital spaces. So there's an American author, social activist, philosopher, and feminist called Grace Lee Boggs. And she has a quote that we also love, which is that there is nothing more important than dialectic thinking. And for us, this is also at the root of how we world build. So dialectical thinking refers to the ability to view issues from multiple perspectives and to arrive at the most economical and reasonable reconciliation of seemingly contradictory information and postures. So we consider this practice to be a way of simulating new structures and ways of existing to test drive possible futures. And this methodology allows us to both work inside and imagine the metaverse together. So we are typically always working inside of gaming engines to create these worlds digitally, which will then be experienced as films or games and immersive experiences, and also prototyping our own technologies. And doing so allows us to become the architects and the collaborators of the future. So I think this goes back to that main point that was said at the beginning, that we really see the metaverse as something that has the potential to pierce our perceptions of reality and defy all that we know. And the metaverse is something that's come up a lot as a buzzword in the last year or so, and it's something that I think we've been kind of talking about amongst ourselves for a lot longer than that, and we don't like the approach that the metaverse is being perceived at right now, because currently a lot of the big corporations that are approaching the metaverse are just using it as another way to replicate existing structures or existing hierarchies that we think are that just they don't need to continue to exist like that. And we want to try and approach it speculatively in a very different way. Technically, it's very challenging to do that, just 3 people. But that's our kind of ideas behind it anyway. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about our visions of the future. And our research and our interests have kind of led us to this idea of protopia. So a protopian society is one where people are free from the gridlocks of society, and they can actively improve life. So it's a more carefully stated form of a dream of societal transformation. And it doesn't say that everything's going to be perfect for everything, but what it focuses on is the possibility to move in mutually desirable directions. So it's a society that has the capacity to become incrementally better as a result of the freedom of its members. So I think when we came upon this definition of protopia, we realized that it very much aligned with the way that we were thinking. We work with a lot of speculative fiction, and we're very much inspired and influenced by that, but it's quite often the extremes of either a utopia that seems really unattainable or a dystopia that's just kind of very sad to imagine. So I think we lie in this kind of gray area in between. And I just wanted to end, I suppose, with some of the questions and the concepts that we've been thinking of. I guess a lot of what I've been talking about today is kind of these speculative ideas, but hopefully it's just another way about thinking about digital complicity. So in the last 6 months or so, we've been world building and imagining a future that is a protopia that's 500 years from now. And we have been, of course, confronted with limitless potentials of technology, from exploring transhuman upgrades to biologically re-engineering humans to prevent disease or add sensory abilities from other species or plant life. And we're also exploring new rules and systems that could exist, such as AI governance and infinite simulations and metaverse worlds that feel as real as the Earth. And of course, with all of these kind of topics, there's so much room for it to swing from one side to being really fantastic to the other side for it to being really oppressive. So it's been a very challenging thing to try and imagine 500 years from now. But some of the questions that we have been asking are, what would it be like to wake up in this time? How will that change our emotional responses to things? How could our consciousness evolve, and what would our relationship with the Earth and other beings be like? So yeah, I didn't really go into any of the specific artworks, but if you... Oh, these images are delayed. This one. So yeah, if you did want to see more of our works, you can visit our website, which is kaiken.cloud, where you will be able to interact with some of the online works and also find more information about the narratives and even more about our approach. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tanja.
Thank you.
And as before, I would invite you to participate in the questions. We don't have much time left, but yeah, so feel free to raise your hand if you have a question to Tanja. Maybe I will start with one question which I asked NAKEEMA as well, which is just like, how would you describe the concept of digital complicity as we wanted to talk about it? Is it the way in which you work together in your collective, or is it more something you would see in this world-building process as being digital complicit?
So I think our approach or understanding of digital complicity is, I guess, a bit double-sided like that. I mean, we see it as something that can bring us together, and how are we digitally complicit with one another, how we use digital tools to collaborate. I mean, to give an example, since we graduated, we haven't had a studio ever since our university degree until the last 6 months. So in all of that time, we've been working online. There are 3 of us, and we've moved between Berlin and London, all of us. So we're never all in the same place at the same time. So we're constantly using the internet to collaborate. We're constantly finding new ways to make works digitally and even physically when we're not in the same environment. So for us, there's this level of complicity within digital technologies that actually enables us to collaborate and to create artworks. But then on the other hand, we do see it as something that, how are you complicit in technologies, kind of more enabling sides and more disabling sides. So there's a lot of technologies or corporations that create tools that we wouldn't necessarily want to be using because of what their impact is on society or even the environment. And so there's all sorts of sides that we see it in, but I think that overall we have an approach that allows us to kind of, I guess, see things from many sides at the same time, because we're so many people. There's a constant kind of friction and back and forth with these things. So,
okay, I'm just looking. You said world building is a big task for 3 people. You're just 3 of you. In which way would you say is this as well an open participatory process, which invites all kinds of people to support you, to interact with you, to build this world together with you?
Sure. So I think that as a unit, KEIKEN is 3 people, but it's also really not. I mean, almost every. I don't think we've actually done any project over the last 7 years that haven't included other artists, musicians, and collaborators locally to us. So on a kind of smaller network. But then every single time we produce a work, we're very open to the feedback we receive. And with KEIKEN meaning experience, we want to create experiences and that people are engaged in. And if we can't listen to those experiences and respond to them accordingly, then I think we're also not really doing our job properly. But I think that there are also other ways in which people can and have collaborated with us. It's when we actually do a lot of kind of workshops and teaching, and we're always hoping that we're listening to other people and they're influencing us as well. So, yeah.
I had the impression that in your work, storytelling is a fundamental part. In which way would you say is good storytelling something which opens, like, quite technical experience as well to just like people who are normally excluded from technical access, let's say?
Well, I think that storytelling is how we see the world and how we've always seen the world as humans. It's how we communicate with one another. It's how we relate to one another. We're constantly telling stories, whether they're factual or fictional. And mythology is also a huge part of that. But I think the thing that we find so great about storytelling is that, I guess, from my own perspective, I was always obsessed with reading stories when I was younger, and never very good at that more academic side of thing. And it's because when you are storytelling, you can actually imagine yourself in the shoes of the protagonist of the story. It's a very immersive experience. So I think that, yeah, for us, storytelling really is at the root of how we approach, because I think when we're working with a lot of more complex technologies, having an approach that is quite soft, or that people can enter into the story themselves, allows them to be a bit more open to different technologies, or it allows them to fit in another world for a little while. And I think we've always been very touched when we've had exhibitions, and some of the best feedback we've had is from people who are from older generations who've just been so fascinated by it all, because they've connected to the magic of the storytelling, and also then been able to access some kind of technology like augmented reality or virtual reality that previously they said that they weren't they were fearful of it somehow. So I think that's, for us, storytelling is like a bridge. It's a tool for communication.
I'm just looking if there are any questions in the public. There are not, and then I have to have a look at the time. It's 11:11, and I think we have to close this round, because the workshops are starting, or they should have started at 11 o'clock. So I think we just delay the lunch break afterwards, so that the workshops can take place in the full 2 hours in which they were planned. Thank you very much, Tanja, for your lightning talk. That was very... And for the workshops, you remember where they took place yesterday. This will be the same space. And just a reminder for those who are not registered in a workshop, there is still the walk and talk possibility and format, which is taking place in the entrance area. And yeah, so lunch break will be a quarter of an hour later, then 1:15, I guess. And afterwards, we continue with the program as foreseen at 2 o'clock with the evaluation here on stage. So thank you very much.